She came to rest on a snowbank at the side of a highway, a teenage girl who could have been anyone's daughter. Her journey had taken her to places no young girl should ever have to know. But finally it had brought her to a small Pennsylvania town she had never seen before. If only she had survived, she would at last have known there were people who cared. She had appeared on the highway as winter gave way to spring. A young woman whose life was cut short, her past and her identity a mystery. Only by learning who she was could anyone hope to find her killer. I'm Marcus Langford, former head of the FBI's New York office. The highway offered the killer a quick and easy escape route, but the trail the FBI followed to bring him to justice was twisted and long. We hoped it would not end in failure. In Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, a late snowstorm had held the promise of spring at arm's length. On his way to work, a motorist drove down a quiet, snow-lined roadway when something on the roadside caught his attention. What he saw was unthinkable in this peaceful valley. Pennsylvania State Police were called in at once. A young woman lay dead on a snowbank near the junction of two major interstates. The county coroner determined she had died before being dumped there. She was wearing only socks, panties, and a sweater. She was young, high school or college age. But perhaps most disturbing of all, a rope was knotted around her neck and her hands were bound. District Attorney Elias Grant stood at the scene, appalled by what he saw. What struck him most was that someone had not only murdered this young woman, but had treated her with such utter disrespect. The way her body lay haphazardly askew on the pile of snow suggested she had been thrown out like nothing more than roadside refuse. It was something that made you angry to witness. Her body was taken away for an autopsy. Soon word of the crime spread through this close-knit town of 7,000. It was the first homicide in Bellefonte in 13 years. Like the district attorney, the townspeople were shocked and outraged. FBI Special Agent Landon Pierce was among them. He had been drawn to the case well before the FBI was officially involved. That whole area is known as Happy Valley. It is a nice place to raise your kids. I lived there for 12 years. Crimes like this just do not happen there. And to have a young girl's body dumped in your community is a heinous thing. People were extremely upset, and even more so they wondered whether the murderer might live among them. Detectives searched for anything that might help identify the girl. They found no purse or wallet and little else. I remember commenting to Trooper Caleb Briggs that morning that he would be very fortunate indeed if he ever managed to identify this young woman, let alone figure out who had murdered her. Trooper Briggs of the Pennsylvania State Police became the lead investigator. There was a slight indentation in the snow, about 6 inches deep, where the body looked as if it had been dumped from some type of vehicle into the berm. He surmised the vehicle had been a truck with a cab fairly high off the ground. Tire tracks nearby proved him right. They had been made by dual wheels, probably the rear wheels of a tractor-trailer cab. An evidence technician made plastic casts of the tracks to be sent to the Pennsylvania State Police Lab. Examiners there would attempt to identify the brand and note anything unusual. Then, if a suspect were found and his tires matched the tracks, the casts could help link him to the scene. Troopers fanned out for clues. They searched nearby fields and even the local Penn State University campus, but found nothing useful. The body was taken to Lehigh Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. There, coroner Dr. Victor Hale performed the autopsy while Trooper Briggs observed. The doctor determined the cause of death to be strangulation. There were no gunshot or stab wounds. The body's core temperature revealed the young woman had been dead less than 12 hours when her body was discovered. It seemed she had died sometime before she was dumped on the roadside, as the coroner at the scene had guessed. Other tests indicated she had had sex before she died. Whether she was raped or had consensual sex was not known. However, based on the circumstances, we believed at the time that a rape may have occurred. Dr. Hale carefully removed the rope from around the girl's neck. Wait a minute, right here, Doc. There's a piece of hair, this black hair. Under the knot was a single dark hair. It did not belong to this blonde girl. But was it the killer's? The hair would be sent to the FBI forensics lab in Washington, D.C., along with the knots for analysis. The type of knots could be important. They might help develop a profile of the killer. But the best clue came from the girl's left hand. There appeared to be something written on the palm. Faint numbers written in ink that had been there for some time, faded and barely legible. It was thought by both the trooper and myself that this could be the lead we were looking for, one that might finally lead us to her identity. The writing was indecipherable, though it looked like it might be numbers. Agent Pierce suggested experts at the FBI lab could make them clear enough to read. The skin was removed from her left hand and forwarded to the FBI lab. The girl's fingerprints were run through a national database of missing persons, but the results proved disheartening. Checks through the AFIS system came back negative. Checks using descriptors and characteristics of the body also came back negative. We had no record of a missing person who matched the one we had discovered. X-rays were taken by a forensic dentist. They could prove crucial in identifying her. If a tentative identification were made, and these X-rays matched those taken when she was alive, they would confirm it. But first she would need to be visually identified by someone who knew her in life, which would be difficult after a full autopsy. Closing facial incisions made for the dental X-rays and masking contusions would take hours of painstaking work. To restore her to the way she looked in life would require the artistry of a skilled mortician. Gregory Vance was the man for the job. When we received her body, she had been through quite an ordeal. We had to put a little makeup on her, get her hair done, dress her. We made her look as lifelike as possible. We then took photographs that were eventually placed in the newspaper. Those photographs showed her as more lifelike than she had looked when first found. But Gregory Vance gave her more than a face. He gave her a name. When the coroner brought her in, he said, "We have a Jane Doe for you." And I said, "Gregory, I don't like calling people Jane Doe. It seems so impersonal." He asked what we were going to call her. I said, "Well, she was found in Spring Township, right?" He said, "Yes." "Why don't we call her Spring? And she was found in the dawn of the morning, so why don't we call her Spring Dawn?" Vance's caring work gave investigators exactly what they needed. They showed photographs of the girl to dozens of truckers at local truck stops, restaurants, and gas stations. Some offered names of people she resembled. Her young face struck a chord of recognition in many who saw it. Notices in local papers and on flyers also generated leads. The outpouring of calls to the state police was plentiful. We had to sift through every lead to try to determine if this person was local. But none of the leads panned out. As the weeks passed and spring blossomed across the valley, the FBI lab called Trooper Briggs. Their analysis showed the writing on the girl's left palm was a phone number with a Florida area code. Briggs found the number had been disconnected. He began to wonder if the area code itself was wrong. But it did not seem right. It did not seem to fit this particular case. Looking at this person, there was no tan. It seemed as if she came from a winterized area, somewhat similar to where we were. However, we did not know where. His best guess was that she came from west or north of Pennsylvania, probably within a 12-hour drive from where the body was found. Briggs also realized there were 2 phone numbers written on the girl's hand, not just one. He noted all the cities within the 12-hour radius that had both the exchanges she had written down. He and Agent Pierce sent the numbers along with photographs and descriptions of the young woman to sheriffs and state police in those areas. Perhaps the information would trigger some leads. As they worked the case, the people of Bellefonte followed each new development, offering help and support. There was a genuine showing of affection for this person and concern. You could say she was posthumously adopted by the community of Bellefonte. And even though we were very quickly able to ascertain that she was not a local resident, there was still a very strong sense that she was someone we cared about. Her story touched everyone, especially Briggs and Pierce. These colleagues and longtime friends could not stop thinking about her tragic death and trying to solve the case even after hours. At the time I was assigned to this case, I had a 17-year-old daughter, and Trooper Briggs had 2 teenage daughters. So I think for both of us, we took a very strong personal interest in the case. As a matter of fact, it pretty much took up all of our time during working hours, and we would often find ourselves talking to each other at night on the phone at our residences. Never was community support so strong as when Gregory Vance began to prepare the body for burial. Florists called donating flowers. Hairdressers called to do her hair. People donated clothing. Ministers were willing to give their services. The vault company, the casket companies, the cemetery where she was to be buried, it sat at the bottom of a beautiful mountain where wildflowers grew. The monument company was willing to donate a stone. It was just amazing how the entire town came together in an effort to bury her. As the days turned into weeks after the body was found, it was time for a burial. Not only did the town want to bring closure to the tragedy, the body could not be preserved much longer. Still, Briggs needed just a little more time. The last thing we wanted to do as a police agency was to lose the body. In other words, we did not want the body buried at that point without identification. Just when the body could be kept no longer, a break in the case finally came. The sheriff's office in Maine received the information packet. Though he did not recognize her face, he called one of the numbers written on the girl's hand. He reached Nathaniel Crow, a guidance counselor at a local school. A detective visited Crow and his wife at their home. When the detective showed the Crows a photograph of the girl, they immediately recognized her, and when they spoke her name, it was eerily familiar. Dawn Marie Ellison. Gregory Vance's choice of the name Spring Dawn had been uncannily accurate. I was shocked. I was amazed. It was just a strange coincidence. But it felt right. She was part of our community. Nathaniel Crow was one of the last people Dawn talked to before she died. Investigators hoped he could lead them closer to her killer. After a search that stretched from Florida to Maine, investigators had learned the identity of the teenage girl found dead near a rural Pennsylvania interstate. As they spoke to Nathaniel Crow, he said she had called him just days before she died from a payphone. He had tried to help her, but it was already too late. The school she attended was mainly for at-risk teens like Dawn herself. She had had problems with authority figures ever since her parents divorced. In Indiana, where her mother lived, she had been through a dozen foster homes and had run away almost as many times. But at this boarding school, she had finally found someone she could trust. Her counselor, Mr. Crow. As Mr. Crow was talking to Dawn, the operator kept interrupting, telling her to put more money in. Time was running out, and Mr. Crow told Dawn to call him again so he would know she was safe. She said she would do that. He gave her his home telephone number, which she then wrote on the palm of her hand. She said she would call back, but she never did. The school sent Dawn's dental records to Pennsylvania, where forensic dentists matched them to X-rays taken at the morgue. The result was a positive identification and a turning point in the case. The FBI entered the case officially under the kidnapping statute. We had a girl who was found in central Pennsylvania lying in a snow pile, tied up, and who had previously been seen just days earlier in the state of Maine. So we had the interstate aspect. The investigation focused in Maine, where Dawn was last seen alive. Maine state police officers interviewed Dawn's friends, including Megan Ellis. Megan told them Dawn had been planning to hitch a ride with a truck driver, as she had done about a year earlier. On that occasion, Dawn and another friend, Tara Winslow, had run off with a trucker named Travis Harlan. They dropped off Tara at her home in Georgia and continued on. What had started as a ride became a relationship. As the weeks passed, they grew closer. Travis took Dawn home to meet his grandmother. They continued to travel together, driving his rig. No one knew exactly where they had gone or what they had done, but Dawn spoke fondly of her time with Travis. They had enjoyed each other's company, and he had treated her well. It seemed one of the few happy times in her troubled life. Then, several months before Dawn's death, the truck was pulled over by police in a random traffic stop. An officer demanded Dawn get out. She complied. When she gave him her license, it triggered a missing persons bulletin filed by her school. The officer told Dawn she would have to come with him. When he tried to take her away from Travis, she pleaded to stay, but to no avail. Police brought her back to school. Since then, her behavior had been good, and she was due to graduate in just a few months. But things were not as they seemed. Apparently, Travis was still in love with her, and maybe she with him. Though she had not seen him since their trip, he had tried to visit her at school. Security guards had kept him from entering the grounds. Not having heard from him in a while, Dawn now told friends she was going to look for Travis and run away with him again. Just days before her body was discovered, she had snuck off from a movie theater. She told her friend Megan she would hitchhike to the Dysart truck stop in Bangor, Maine, hoping to meet Travis. Travis now became a prime suspect since Dawn was last seen headed to meet him. Agent Pierce attempted to track him down. He lived in Mississippi, but Travis proved elusive. The closest relative agents found was his grandmother, who lived in Emery, Mississippi. She welcomed them inside and told them she had raised Travis as her own son. He was devoted to her. No matter where he was, he called her almost every day. He had even brought Dawn home to meet her. Now, when agents told the woman of Dawn's violent death, she was devastated. Then she shared her own tragic news. Several months earlier, her grandson had stopped calling her. He had also stopped working and taking care of his pets. He had left his wallet in his house and disappeared. His grandmother believed he was dead, though his body was never found. His car was found riddled with bullets, and there was reason to think he had gotten into trouble with some very unsavory characters and had met a violent end. Agents learned his car had been found several months prior to Dawn's death, a few miles from his Mississippi home. By a strange twist of fate, Travis's disappearance had led to Dawn's death. If Travis had arrived, Dawn would still be alive. Their star-crossed love affair had ended in a double tragedy. Now, with Travis presumed dead, investigators struggled to find Dawn's killer and were almost back to square one. Their most promising lead had gone cold. They again had no suspect in a chilling case, the death of a beautiful 17-year-old girl left on a rural Pennsylvania roadside. On a tip from Dawn's friend, Agent Pierce and Trooper Briggs went to the Dysart truck stop in Bangor, Maine, where Dawn had said she was headed when she was last seen. They showed Dawn's photograph to the cashier, who remembered seeing her on the telephone a few weeks earlier. She was over there. Surprisingly enough, even though time had passed, agents discovered that people recalled seeing the young blonde girl there, standing at the doorway asking truckers for rides as they walked through. She was recalled by several people at the truck stop. I guess when you are a young teenage girl and you are out on the road like that, people take notice. It seemed obvious this was where Dawn had made her last phone calls. This cashier's desk, where a trucker would pay for fuel, was only about 15 feet from the bank of pay telephones Dawn had used to make calls back home and down to the school. So it was easy to visualize how an encounter would have occurred between Dawn and a trucker. Agent Pierce secured a federal grand jury subpoena for the telephone records. Going through them would be a painstaking task, but it was the most promising option in a case fast running out of leads. The people Dawn had called might know where she had been going or who she was going with. The phone records confirmed Dawn's call to her guidance counselor Nathaniel Crow in Maine. They also revealed she had phoned other friends. It seemed her last call was to Tara Winslow, the girl who had traveled with Dawn and Travis. A state trooper visited Tara at her home in Georgia. Tara confirmed Dawn had called her from the Dysart truck stop. Dawn said she had gotten a ride to Dysart's from a friendly trucker who had given her money for food when he dropped her off. Tara said her friend had been disappointed that she had not found Travis there. She seemed to have no one else to turn to and nowhere to go. If she headed toward Indiana where her mother lived, she feared authorities would be looking for her. Based on the conversation she had had with her girlfriend in Georgia, Trooper Briggs and I reasoned that she had obtained a ride with a truck driver from the Dysart truck stop. At that point, I decided it would be best if we attempted to identify who may have stopped there for gas during the period surrounding when Dawn was last seen there. And so I had a federal grand jury subpoena issued for all the receipts from the truck stop for the period surrounding when Dawn was last seen there. Meanwhile, Trooper Briggs obtained receipts for the 3 truck stops closest to where Dawn's body was found in Pennsylvania. They hoped that whoever had given Dawn a ride had bought gas in both places. It was possible. The distance from Bangor to Bellefonte is just over 650 miles. But not probably. A big rig can easily travel 1,500 miles or more on a single filling. Undoubtedly, it was a long shot. But Pierce and Briggs nonetheless began the painstaking task of scanning thousands of gas receipts. Over the next several weeks, I compiled the receipts from Maine and from Pennsylvania, and ended up with two separate lists. After comparing one list against the other, I noticed there was only one match on the entire list of several thousand names. The name was Victor Harlan Cross. Cross had bought gas that morning at the Dushore truck stop just as Don was talking on the telephone 15 feet away. A few days later, he gassed up again in Milesburg, Pennsylvania, just a few hours before Don's body was found nearby. So this was a big breakthrough for us. We had a guy who was in Bangor when Dawn was in Bangor and in central Pennsylvania right about the time her body was found. The receipt showed Victor Harlan Cross worked at an Ohio trucking company. In response to a call from Agent Pierce, his manager verified the credit card purchases. Cross was driving Truck 44 on a route consistent with the events of the crime. Investigators now had a suspect in the killing of 17-year-old Dawn Marie Ellison. Investigators pursued their prime suspect, wanted for the murder of a 17-year-old high school girl whose body was dumped near a Pennsylvania interstate. The man was a trucker named Victor Harlan Cross. His manager told the FBI he was a model employee at an Ohio trucking company, but investigators found he had a dark past. A criminal history check revealed he had a rather lengthy criminal record. Most importantly, he had been in the U.S. military, and while in the military, had been convicted of attempted murder via strangulation and had served time in Fort Leavenworth for that conviction. His military records gave investigators another key fact. We found that his blood type was A positive, which fit him into the small portion of the population that would be a possible source of the seminal fluid found in Dawn. It seemed investigators were closing in on their suspect. There was only one thing left that we could do to further attempt to identify whether he might have been the individual responsible for this murder, and that was to make a determination as to what type of tires he had on his truck. At Agent Pierce's request, an Ohio FBI agent inspected the tires on Truck 44 while Cross was on the road in another rig. The tires were XD1 Michelin Low Profiles, a fairly unusual brand. At the Pennsylvania State Police Lab, an examiner attempted to match that brand to the tire cast made where Dawn's body was found. He compared the cast to detailed photographs in a tire reference guide. They matched. Another breakthrough in the case. So we had a match on the tires, we had a match on the blood, we had the fuel slips. At this point, according to the United States Attorney's Office, this was sufficient to put together a search warrant to search Cross's truck and to also perhaps take blood and hair samples from his body for DNA analysis. When Cross was again away in another rig, FBI evidence recovery technicians examined Truck 44. But if Dawn had in fact been in this truck, it would have been at least 2 months earlier. So investigators did not expect to find much. The fact that the truck was exceptionally clean did not make them any more optimistic. The search took pretty much the entire day, and it was an exhaustive search. We were searching both the tractor and the trailer itself. There were over 300 pictures taken of the tractor trailer, but nothing turned up. An evidence technician was about to declare the search complete when something caught the investigator's eye. I looked at the passenger door and noticed that at the bottom of the door there was a piece of carpeting. And upon closer examination of the carpeting, I noticed one single blonde head hair interwoven in the fibers of the carpet. It seemed amazing, but there it was, as if Dawn had not been quite ready to give up yet. The hair would be sent to the FBI lab for analysis. My thought was that it was a little bit too good to be true that this could be a hair from Dawn. Now investigators waited for Cross to return from his run. They told him they were looking for a runaway last seen at a truck stop in Bangor, Maine. They implied they were talking to many drivers. They asked to see Cross's logbook for his record of travels on the days in question. The logs are government mandated to keep truckers from driving too many hours at a time. Cross admitted he had falsified his logs. Truckers commonly alter them to stay within legal limits, but it seemed Cross's logs had been selectively altered. The one thing we noticed was that the misrepresentations in the log seemed to occur just conveniently when the fuel was purchased in Pennsylvania. In response to questions, Cross calmly described his routes. But when asked if he had fueled up between Bangor and Pennsylvania, he said he did not have to. The 240 gallons his truck could carry was enough for the trip. I then suggested to him that I had a fuel slip indicating that he had in fact filled up his truck that morning. He paused for a second, and then advised that he did not in fact recall doing that, and it was due to the fact that they gave free showers away at that particular truck stop in Milesburg. I asked him why he had not remembered it, and he said to me, "Well, I guess I just forgot." Then they showed him a photograph of Dawn. We asked him if he had ever seen this girl before. At that point in time, he very calmly and casually stated no. He had never seen this girl. He did not know her, nor had he ever met her before in his life. They told him they had strong evidence linking him to the crime. Dawn's phone calls from Bangor that coincided with his stopover there, the match of his truck tires to the tire tracks at the scene, and the match of his blood type to the type found on the body. He calmly chalked it all up to coincidence. At no point during the interview did any of his mannerisms indicate that he was at all nervous with my line of questioning. And as the night slowly went on, I think even Trooper Briggs agreed that he became less of a suspect for us even though we had all this circumstantial evidence. He was just too calm and cooperative. Cross remained friendly even when investigators produced a warrant for blood and hair samples. They would later learn from FBI profilers that such an excessively calm response can be a sign of guilt. When the results came in, the samples from Cross matched the hair and DNA the killer had left behind on Dawn's body. With that evidence in hand, agents obtained a federal arrest warrant for Victor Harlan Cross. The FBI and the Pennsylvania State Police had identified the man who had brutally raped and murdered a young woman. When they arrested him as he returned from another trucking run, Cross suddenly dropped his easygoing attitude. One of the differences between the initial interview of Mr. Cross and the arrest was his demeanor. No longer was he the cool, calm, and collected person he had been during the initial interview. Instead, Mr. Cross appeared to be very sullen and was angry toward both Agent Pierce and myself. Cross's arrest was the reward for determined investigators committed to catching the killer of a girl who could have been anyone's daughter. Just months earlier, investigators had only a body in the snow near an interstate with no identification. He was charged with first, second, and third-degree murder, rape, kidnapping, and the federal charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. For Dawn, the nightmare started as an adventure. Just days before her body was discovered, she left her friend Megan at a movie theater near their school in Poland Springs, Maine. Dawn headed for Bangor, where she hoped to meet Travis Harlan. A friendly trucker gave her a ride. She and Travis had been separated for months, and she looked forward to seeing him. But he was not there. She could not have known he was missing and presumed dead. Instead, her life would intersect with that of a much more sinister man, Victor Harlan Cross. Dawn spent the day making calls at the Dysart truck stop in Bangor. She telephoned friends, letting them know where she was and that she was safe. She also talked to her school counselor, Nathaniel Crow, to say she had run away but was fine and promised to call him that evening. She wrote his numbers on her hand for safekeeping. When Victor Harlan Cross paid for his gas, he saw Dawn on the phone just 15 feet from the cash register. It did not take much to convince him to give her a ride. She and Cross would head south. Prosecutors reconstructed the events that had led to Dawn Ellison's death. She had no idea of the danger that lay ahead. The hours she spent with Victor Harlan Cross would be her last. While Dawn prepared to sleep for the night, Cross was still awake, falsifying his logbook. Dawn would soon find herself a helpless captive, trapped by a cruel predator with no escape. Late that night, Cross raped and strangled her, probably in the sleeping compartment of his truck. That same night, after buying gas in Pennsylvania, he disconnected his cab from his trailer at the truck stop. He drove away looking for a place to leave Dawn's body. He drove through the backwoods of Pennsylvania, anxious to dump the lifeless form. In the early morning hours, he pulled over to the side of the road. He pushed Dawn's body out onto the side of a highway entrance ramp. Cross almost certainly believed he would never be caught. And if not for dedicated investigators, advanced forensics testing, and plain good luck, he might easily have gotten away with murder. District Attorney Elias Grant served as prosecutor. One point that I wanted to emphasize to the jury was how long it took Dawn to die at the hands of Victor Cross. The pathologist testified that from the moment the rope was knotted around her neck, it took 4 minutes for her to die. Grant's approach was effective. After many hours of deliberation, the jury found Victor Harlan Cross guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Cross immediately to life in prison without parole. He is serving his time at the Greene County Maximum Security Prison in western Pennsylvania. The legacy of this investigation is the fact that at the beginning, all we had was a young girl lying in a snow pile who had died a death no one should have to die. No identification on her for the most part, and a very strong concern among law enforcement agencies that she would never be identified, much less have the killer caught and convicted. But it seemed Pierce and Briggs may have performed an even greater service than they first realized. At the time of the arrest, there was a lot of media interest in Cross because in his own home state of Ohio, there had been a number of young women found along the highways and on ramps in the time leading up to the crime who had been tied up as well and left along on ramps. A review of the VICAP database indicated that in the decade before, there were approximately 600 young women who were found along the highways and who had died in a suspicious manner. We were not able to conclusively state that Mr. Cross was involved in any of these murders. What we do know is that after the arrest of Mr. Cross, the murders that we were talking about in the state of Ohio ceased. For Dawn Ellison, peace had finally come. The gentle people of Bellefonte will always remember her and the killer who took her life and changed theirs forever.